Hello again, fourth year students. Today we are going to talk about the second term in testing, or in our course, which is test design and assessment, which is assessment. Last time we talked about testing, we defined this term. We tried to understand how testing can be helpful for both of the teacher and the students. And we emphasize one important point, which is that a test is or it can be one of the tools that the teacher can depend on in assessing his students or her students' abilities, knowledge, intelligence, and so on. So, today we are going to study a new term, which is assessment, and as I told you, that it is going to be bigger than testing. Okay, it is including testing. So in this video we are going to be introduced to some definitions of the term, the types of assessment, and the approaches of assessment. If we start with the definition, as you know, that I'm going here to list a number of definitions for the term assessment, and we are going to discuss them together here. So the first definition says that assessment is the process of making a judgment or forming an opinion after considering something or someone carefully. Number two, assessment is the systematic process of documenting and using empirical data to measure knowledge, skills, attitudes, and beliefs. So these two definitions emphasize that throughout assessment, the teacher can judge. Judge what? Judge the abilities, the knowledge, the capacities, the intelligence of his or her students. Throughout what? Of course, he should have something solid in order to depend on and measure and judge and evaluate and assess these things in his or her students. So what kind of empirical data he or she is going to have? He is going to depend, for instance, on the scores that the students, his or her students, have got in a test that he made for them. Okay, so you see, you see, after making a test for your students, and you have given them you correct their papers and given them scores, you can, as a teacher, use these scores to measure or to judge whether your students were successful or not, whether they need to do more effort in understanding and working hard, or so on. What about you as a teacher? How would you help your students to enhance, to be better in the future? So this is assessment, that you depend on the scores, or you take these scores that your students have got in the test to be the data that you are going to analyze to arrive at a certain judgment related to their abilities and capacities or intelligence in the course that you have taught them. Okay? Number three, assessment is a key part of today's educational system. Its purpose is to gather relevant information about student performance or progress, or to determine students' interest to make judgments about their learning process. So you see, assessment is mainly found in an educational context. This is again a very important feature that we also have found it with testing. When I asked you testing is mainly found in which context, we found that one of the definitions said that is mainly an educational tool. So the same thing here. Assessment is also is part of the educational system. It is also used within the educational context to, as we said in the previous two definitions, to do certain processes, to achieve certain processes. What are they? To measure or to determine our students' level and to judge their abilities, to judge whether they were successful or not. Number four, assessment is the engine which drives students' learning. So throughout assessment, throughout the results that I am getting from analyzing the scores, analyzing the performance of my students, I can every time develop my teaching process, okay, in order to develop the learning level of my students. So you see, it is an engine. It is there should be working all the time. This teacher should do assessment all the time, should assess his students all the time. He should not, or she should not only wait for the end of the year or the end of the course and make a test in order to get scores. No. Later on, when we are going to study the types of the assessment, you are going to see that there can be some daily assessment. Okay, depending on the daily participation or the daily performance of your students, you as a teacher can daily, okay, assess your students. So you see, it is an engine. Which, what does it mean? That it is continuous. Every time you meet your students and you teach them, you have to play the role of the assessor as a teacher. Number five, in education, the term assessment refers to a wide variety of methods or tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document the academic readiness, learning progress, skill acquisition, or educational needs of a student. So again, definition number five again defines for us the term assessment within the educational context. And here in this definition, it is saying for us that assessment in fact depends on different tools. We learn that the test can be one of the tools that the teacher can depend on in assessing his students, or in finding out their interest, or in measuring their abilities. Okay, so test is only one of these tools. Number six, assessment is any of a variety of procedures used to obtain information about students' performance. So you see, again, the same idea has been repeated here. The assessment is a variety of procedures. Assessment, as this process depends on different tools and techniques that can help the teacher to assess his or her students. It refers to the full range of information gathered and synthesized by teachers about their students and their classrooms. So what is the assessment? It is the information that you as a teacher gather about your students. Okay, how would you gather these pieces of information about your students? Of course, from the techniques, from the tools that you are going to adopt, to apply. Okay, after you gather these pieces of information, you are going to analyze them. Through this analysis, or the results of this analysis would help you to know something about the abilities, or to judge the capacities of your students. It is a method for analyzing and evaluating students' achievements or program success. Assessment is not an end in itself, but a vehicle for attaining educational goals and for improving on these educational goals. So, will my role as a teacher end when I assess my students? No. Of course, I will take the results that I will have from assessment and build the new things on them. Like what? For example, I can develop my course. If I find out from the information, from the results of my assessment, that my students, they are weak in a certain part of the course, okay, so what should I do in order to help them? I should, for example, for instance, add more activities in order to help them practice and learn and develop themselves in this part. Okay, if I see that, or if I found out that my students, they have certain interest in a certain activity, okay, but they dislike another activity. So this means that uh, that I can, or I have an idea now about which type of activities that I may use in the classroom in order to help my students learn and engage in learning. So you see, it is not an end, but the results of the assessment helps you that you get helps you to develop your work for your future courses. It is not a single event, but it is just like a cycle. Okay, so when every time you assess your students, you get new results, and these results help you to develop yourself as a teacher, to develop the learning level and the abilities of your students. Is it clear? And this also will lead you, after applying, for instance, the new procedure, you are also going to make another assessment to find out whether your plan was correctly applicable or not. Okay, did you have, or did you get the results that you were wishing for or not? And this will lead you again to analyze the results you have, which is assessment again, and assessment will lead you to develop yourself more and more, and your course more and more. It must be an open process. Okay, so it is, you see, it never ends. It is an open process. It happens every time. It can be happening, as we said, every day. Number 7, in educational practice, assessment is an ongoing process. Ongoing, which means that it is a continuous process that encompasses, that involves a wide range of methodological techniques. Okay, as we said, that this definition also supports what is said in the previous definitions, that the assessment depends on different techniques, different methods, and as you remember, we said test can be one of them. Whenever a student responds to a question, offers a comment, or tries out a new word or structure, the teacher subconsciously makes an appraisal of the student's performance. Okay, so you see, it is not necessarily that you wait for the time of the test in order to assess your students. No, you can, as we said, assess your students on a daily basis. Whenever you ask a question and one of your students is answering, so you are, as the Douglas Brown is saying here, you are, as a teacher, subconsciously assessing this student, appraising this student. Okay, you are connecting between the level before the performance of this students today and the performance of the same student maybe in the previous classes. Okay, and you are going to build your expectation for this student. Is he going to be developed? Is he going to be better in the future or not? So as he's saying here, whenever a student is making an effort, is producing something in the classroom, you as a teacher, your responsibility is what is to assess this student, to evaluate, to judge. Okay, to judge the production of this student, and not only the production, but you are judging the development that this student has made. Is he developing? As we said, is he better than yesterday, or what do you expect for him? Will he be better tomorrow, or what? Written work, from a jotted down phrase to a formal essay, is performance. Okay, so if you are asking your students to write even a simple word on the blackboard, okay, on the board, or a paragraph, or a sentence, or an essay, this is a performance. And throughout this performance, this can be what we are calling it a product. The student is producing something. You can take or make advantage or make use of this product in assessing your students' development. It's performance that ultimately judged by what? By the teacher and possibly other students. Reading and listening activities usually require some sort of a productive performance that the teacher observes and implicitly appraises, however peripheral and that appraisal may be. Okay, so it is not necessarily that you are going to give your students marks or scores whenever they are making prediction. No. Okay, as he is saying here, even if this assessment is done for the student without scores, without giving them formal marks, you can you can make, or this is called, what this is also called, assessment, because here you are putting in your mind, or you are comparing the level of your students, as we said today, from last week, for instance. Okay, you are judging whether your students has developed or not from the simple product that he may or she may produce, even if it is one word. Okay, so you throughout everything that the students produce in a class, you can make your own assessment of your students' level and production. A good teacher never ceases, never stops. Okay, so you see, a good teacher never stops to assess students. That's this reinforces the idea that we said above, that it is what, a continuous process, whether those assessments are incidental or intended, you see. So you, if you want to be a good teacher, you have to put in your mind that you have all the times to what you need to assess your students, whether this assessment is going to be based on giving them scores, or without or it is going to be informal. Okay, and we are going to see that the informal assessment is going to be without scores. So these are the 7 definitions of assessment, and as you have seen, they all have concentrated on one point, which is similar points. They share similar, or they, in fact, they focus on similar points, which are the following. As we said, that assessment is a part of the educational system, a part of educational context. Okay, throughout assessment, the teacher can judge the abilities, the development, the knowledge, the learning capacities of his students. Okay, throughout what? Throughout depending on empirical data. What kind of empirical data that the teacher needs in order to assess his students or her students? These empirical data can be the scores that they got in the test, or it can be the productions that they are making in the class every day. Okay, however simple and small this production can be, but it can help the teacher to assess the level or the learning abilities of his or her students. Okay, what else? We learned that the assessment may depend on different or a variety of techniques, and as you know, we said that a test can be one of them. Okay, also we have learned that assessment is not necessarily to give scores when you assess your students. Okay, also we learned that a good teacher is the teacher who is making assessment for his students on a continuous basis. So it is an ongoing process. It is a continuous process. So all these features, all of the assessment, we can understand them, or we have understood them from the 7 definitions that we have explained. Okay, the second item is talking about what the types of assessments. And we are going to explain different types of assessment, but I want you to focus on the first 2 types, formative and summative assessment. Okay, so the formative assessment is in process evaluation of student learning that are typically administered multiple times during a unit, course, or academic program. The general purpose of a formative assessment is to give educators in-process feedback about what students are learning or not learning, so that instructional approaches, teaching materials, and academic support can be modified accordingly. Formative assessments are usually not scored or graded, and they may take a variety of forms, from more formal quizzes and assignments to informal questioning techniques and in-class discussions with the students. So you see here, formative assessment is mainly related to the daily assessment that you are making for your students, depending in class. Okay, you see, whenever you go to to the classroom, you meet your students and you try to you start your lesson and to explain something in you. Of course, there is going to be what? There's going to be some question and answers between you and your students. You are going to ask them to give you, for example, to ask them to give examples, to ask them to comment, to ask them to make to do assignments, okay, to make group work or pair work, to discuss, or to tell them, for example, to assign for them a quiz. Okay, so all these techniques help you to what to have or to make a formative assessment. As you know that usually in our situation we say it is the daily participation. Okay, and here this formative assessment is not usually scored or graded. It can be scored or graded. Okay, you can give your students scores or graded on some of the activities, okay, in order to motivate them to work hard, to be better next time. Is it clear? But other things, for example, to give them assignments, okay, exercises, to tell them for instance, for tomorrow you have to do exercise on page 16, for instance. So you are not going to give them scores or for doing assignments, but subconsciously as a teacher you are going to assess which student will come next time and he or she is doing the assignment, okay, and which student who's not going to do. This will help you at the end of the year to understand or to know or to judge or to evaluate which student was careful to follow up with you, and which student was not careful to do that. Is it clear? So you are not really giving them scores, but it helps you to at the end of the year to evaluate the general performance, the overall performance of your students. This is called what? This is called formative assessment. Okay? The second main type of assessment is called summative assessment. Summative assessment, it is used to evaluate student learning at the conclusion of a specific instructional period. You see? So the formative assessment happens during the course. Okay, while the summative assessment, no, it happens at the end, at the conclusion. At the conclusion means at the end of a specific program or a specific course, or at the end of the year, school year or academic year. Okay, and of course usually at the end of, here is he saying that at the end of a unit, course, semester, program or school year, usually, or the main type or the main technique that teachers depend on in summative assessment is what? Making tests, making exams for their students. Okay, and these tests are going to be what? Scored or graded. You see, this is the difference. So for the summative assessment, you are going to give what? You have to. It is obligatory to give scores, to give grades for your students. While, if you remember, we said with the formative assessment, you ask your students to do activities, but it is not necessarily that you are going to give them scores. Okay, so like what? And if we can go back to summative assessments, What are the techniques that you can assess your students at the end of the year? You can assess your students through scored or graded tests, assignments, projects. Okay, you ask a group, you divide your students into groups, and you ask each student to make a project about a certain, for example, active part of the course, and you tell them that I'm going to evaluate or give you score according to the whether I like the project, whether the project was useful or not. Okay, that are used to determine whether students have learned what they were expected to learn during the defined instructional period. So you see, these are the main two types of assessment, which are the formative and the summative. We are going to explain more types of assessment, and whenever we explain something, I will remind you that it is similar to what? Is this similar to the formative or the summative? More new types of assessment is what the formal and the informal assessment. Here we have a comparison between the formal and the informal assessment. The informal assessment, it is said here that it is unplanned observations and general feedback. So as a teacher, you are going to observe your students in their daily in the classes, okay? And you are going to give them general feedback. Like what? Okay, like good job. Okay, well done. Or you correct, for example, for them their mistakes. This is also a general feedback. Or when they write something for their written assignments, okay, you write for them faces, smiley face, or not a smiley face. Okay, so these are what general feedback, which means that you are appraising their work, you are praising their production without giving them scores or grades. This reminds of you of what? Of the formative assessment. Okay? Like what kind of techniques that you can use in the informal in the informal assessment. You can depend on think, pair, share. You divide them into pairs and you ask them to do certain activity, like asking and answering questions, for example, or playing games, dialogues, essay writing, note taking, group work. Okay, you see, the informal assessment is similar to what? To the formative assessment. If we come to the formal assessment, you are going to see that the formal assessment depends on activities in class that you give to students for which they receive graded feedback. Okay, so here the feedback that you are going to give for your students on the production that they have made should be graded. So you are going to give them scores. Okay, what are the techniques, what are the things that you can depend on in the formal assessment? You can use test, okay, scored assignment, presentation, notes, projects, posters. So you see here, this is similar to what? To summative assessment. Okay, so here, although the terms we have used here are different, but the idea of the formative and the summative assessment, they are what? They are repeated. We have number 4, final assessment. Final assessment, it is the last activity students must complete in a course. A final assessment may be an exam, a culminating activity, or a combination of the two. So you see here, it is the final activity that the students can do in the course, and it can be in a form of an exam. So it is similar to what? To the summative assessment. Okay? This task assesses a student's knowledge of a subject and may be cumulative. A final assessment is similar, you see, is similar in nature to summative assessment. Why? Because both of them, both of the summative assessment and the final assessment, they should be done where they should be made by the teacher at the end of the course, at the end of the school year or academic year, and you can depend on both of them on tests, on exams. Okay, and throughout you are going to give them scores. This is the third similarity. They should be scored, graded activities or graded exams, and through the grades you can assess your students' what knowledge, which included end of unit test, standardized testing, and cumulative work such as creating a portfolio over the duration of a course. A final assessment refers to the task that evaluates students' progress in a course. Okay? This is a way for students to recognize their weaknesses and for instructors to understand where they have excelled and where improvement is needed when teaching. So the final assessment, the results that you get from the summative assessment and from the final assessment will be helpful for both the teacher and the students. The students will understand whether they were good students, successful students, or weak students, so that they have to work hard. Okay, what about the teacher? The teacher is going to understand or to know from the results that he is going to get whether his course or the teaching method that he has used with his students was successful or needs to be improved for the future. A final assessment ultimately provides instructors with data about their teaching and their students' learning. Number 5, continuous assessment. Continuous assessment provides day-to-day feedback about the learning and teaching process. You see, it is day-to-day. So it is similar to what? To the formative assessment. Because we said the formative assessment is done on a daily basis. Assessment can reinforce the efficacy of teaching and learning. So when you assess your students every day, this doesn't help only you to judge the levels of your students, but also it helps you to judge whether the activities that you have used as a teacher with your students were good or not, were suitable for your students' level or not. They understood these activities or not. They like these activities or not. Okay? It also encourages the understanding of teaching as a formative process, you see, that evolves over time with feedback and input from students. So also you can ask for your students to give you their opinions, what they think about the activities, for instance, that they have practiced today. Did they like it? Did they find them difficult? Did they understand what you explained? Or for instance, they need you to repeat something. So also the feedback that you get from your student can be one of the techniques that helps you to develop or to improve your teaching method. So here, this is continuous assessment, which is similar to the formative assessment. Number 6, internal versus external assessment. Internal assessment is what the teacher does as part of the coursework. It's what the teacher is doing inside the classroom. For instance, asking the students to write essays, to do assignments, to be in groups and do a project, okay, to make a poster, even quizzes, okay, a short quiz, whether it is graded, scored, or not scored. As long as it is going to be inside the classroom, done by the teacher with his students, so it is going to be what? Internal assessment. Okay, what about the external? External assessment, on the other hand, refers to the examination, which is usually taken in the exam period once your lectures and workshops are finished. So, external assessment happens at the end of the course, at the end of the school year, academic year, at the end of the workshop, at the end of the unit, for example, and it can be done by the teacher or by a group of teachers, okay, by the teachers and administrators, by supervisors, okay, by a committee from all those people. So this is called what? External assessment. So again, you see, the internal assessment can be similar to what? To the formative assessment done by the teacher with his students inside the classroom on a daily basis. So it is what? Similar to the formative assessment. While when what happens at the end of the year, the exams, okay, the larger scales exams, that is can be conducted for you by your teacher or a group of teachers or a certain committee. This is called what? External, and it is similar to what? To the summative assessment. Okay. Number 7, we have diagnostic assessment. Okay, from the name, from its name, diagnostic. So we are after diagnosis. It is a form of pre-assessment where teachers can evaluate students' strengths, weaknesses, knowledge, and skills before their instruction. So, diagnostic assessment can happen, or you can make this assessment at the beginning of the course. Why? In order to know or to find out what your students know about the topic that you are supposed to teach them. Okay, for instance, if you want to make a course for certain levels of students to learn English, so at the beginning of the course you have to what? You have to make a certain assessment, a certain test, any technique throughout which you can assess the level of your students, the knowledge they have, okay, how much, for instance, vocabulary they know, what do they know about English grammar, okay, are they able to read or not, how much they can write, can they write paragraphs, for instance, or essays. So you make for them a test, and depending on the results you get, you are going to divide them according to levels. Is it clear? For each level, you are, for example, beginners, intermediate, and advanced, and for each level, you are going to set a certain or prepare a certain program that is suitable for their abilities and for the knowledge they have. Is it clear? So this diagnostic assessment can happen when? At the beginning of the course, or it can be at the end. Okay, an identical assessment may be given post instruction. What does it mean post instruction? At the end, when you finish your course, when you finish your program or your academic year. Is it clear? To identify, okay, why? To identify if students have met a course's required learning objectives or not. So of course, because you are a teacher, you should have what? Objective, goals to arrive at. Okay, so at the end, for instance, at the beginning of the course, you say that throughout this course that is going to be, for instance, for 2 months, my goal is to teach my students the tenses, the main tenses of English grammar. Okay, at the end of the course, which is going to last for 2 months, you are going to make for them what? A test in the English tenses that you have taught them. The results that you are going to get from this test will help you to know that whether you have achieved these objectives or not, whether your students at the end of the course have really learned the tenses so that you achieved your goals or your objectives, or they failed to learn, and this means that there should be a mistake in the program or in the procedures that you have followed during the course. With this form of assessment, teachers can plan meaningful and efficient instruction. So the results that you are going to get from the test, whether from this assessment, diagnostic assessment, whether you make it at the beginning or you make it at the end, will help you to what? To have ideas, to create new ideas, new activities, to build a new course, to put a new syllabus in order to help your students to learn better. Okay, and can provide students with an individualized learning experience. The last one is called dynamic assessment. Traditionally, the most common method to evaluate students has been static assessment. So all the types that we have talked about is called what? Static assessment. Why? Because as you see, that most of them we said they are what? Implemented or achieved or made or constructed when at the end of the course, at the end of the learning process. Why? In order to examine the knowledge of my students. I teach them for a certain period of time, and at the end of the course I am making for them an exam in order to find out whether they have learned what I taught them or not. This is called static assessment. Okay? The new type of assessment that appears nowadays is called what? Dynamic assessment. Okay? Dynamic, it is called dynamic because it is going to be opposite or in contrast to the what? To the static assessment. So the dynamic assessment, in contrast, dynamic assessment helps to identify students' performance based on what they are learning or they can learn through interaction. So the dynamic assessment means that the teacher should not wait to the end of the program or the course or the school year to make a test and to find out whether his or her students they learned the thing that he was teaching them or not. Okay? The dynamic assessment means that you should make the two processes together, teaching and assessing at the same time throughout interaction. Okay? Make your students interact with each other in class, and while they are interacting, and you can also be part of the process, you can also interact with them. Is it clear? Throughout this interaction, you can assess that whether they were learning or not learning. Okay? What they know and what they don't know. This is called what? Dynamic assessment. Why is it dynamic assessment? Because it happens continuously. It happens every day. It happens throughout interaction. It doesn't only assess what your students have learned from the things that you teach them. No, it helps you to know what they know, maybe from previous experience, okay, and what they are able to learn. Is it clear? Some students, for instance, can learn certain things, okay, while other students cannot learn them. If we are talking, for instance, about prepositions, some students are good in prepositions. They know that, for instance, I use in with the places, but I use on with days, with time. But other students cannot understand this from the first time you explain this for them. They need more and more practice. So the dynamic assessment, okay, if you put your students in interaction with each other in a communicative situation throughout which they use the preposition in real situations, you can assess whether they are learning or not learning. So dynamic assessment makes more emphasis on the process rather than the product. Okay, so the static assessment examines what the product. When you are making a test for your students, they are going to produce in the sheet of paper, in their answer sheet, what they have learned from the things that you taught them. Okay, so you are measuring what the product, their product. But in the dynamic assessment, no, you are assessing what their process of learning, how they learn, not what they learn. Is it clear? So understanding how your students learn is going to be beneficial for the teacher, in order because this will help the teacher to understand what kind of activities, what kind of topics, what kind of subjects, okay, that can be interesting for his or her students in order to learn, and what kind of difficult for topics things that they don't like to talk about, things that they don't like to see. So he is going to be what? To remove them from his or her syllabus. Okay? These are the types of assessment, although that we have explained 8 ones, but you see all of them, they repeat the same idea of the formative and the summative assessment. Sorry, I forgot that there's another one, which is number 9. Norm referenced versus criterion referenced assessment. Norm referenced assessment is a type of test that assesses the test taker's ability and performance against other test takers. So you compare between what the scores of your students, which one has got the higher score and which one has got the least score. Okay? It could also include a group of test takers against another group of test takers. Or you can compare between sections. For example, the scores that section A, the students of section A have got, you compare them with the scores of section B. This is done to differentiate high and low achievers. So why? Why do they do that? In order to find out who is the high level students and who is the low level students. The test contents covers a broad area of topics that the test takers are expected to know, and the difficulty of the content varies. So it is going to be, for instance, if you are examining or testing them in English, it is going to include different items about English, like grammar, pronunciation, reading, writing, vocabulary, and so on. Okay? This test must also be administered in a standardized format. Norm reference test helps determine the position of the test taker in a predefined population. Examples of norm reference tests include SAT or ACTS. These tests do not have a predetermined curriculum, and the topics on the test vary depending on the panel that sets the test. Okay, so here, for this type of assessment, you don't need to teach your students. Okay, it's just like the TOEFL, just like the IELTS. Is it clear? You go and you have this test, and it's not necessarily that you joined the course before that in order to pass this test. And when you go there, you are going to see that the test includes different items about English: listening, speaking, reading, writing, is it clear? Grammar, vocabulary, everything related to English, and they are going to you are going to get a score after they correct your sheet or answer sheet, and sorry, and you are going to be whether you are going to be a high achiever or a low achiever. Depending on the score that you are going to get in the IELTS or in the TOEFL, you are going to be accepted in a certain scholarship or a certain study program, or you can go to move to live in another country. Okay, this is called a norm referenced assessment, that you are evaluated or you are assessed according to a certain principle. What about the criterion reference system? It's a type of test that assesses the test taker's ability to understand a set curriculum. Okay, so here the criterion reference assessment, no, it depends on understanding a curriculum, which means that before the student should have studied something before they took the exam. In this test, a curriculum is set in the beginning of the class, which is then explained by the instructor. This is what we do. Okay? For instance, in our course, which is test design and assessment, we have a curriculum, and my job or my responsibility as a teacher is to explain this curriculum for you, because at the end of the school year, I am going to assess you throughout making a test or exam. So at the end of the lesson, the test is used to determine how much did the test taker understand. This test is commonly used to measure the level of understanding a test taker before and after an instruction is given. So you see, it can be done either at the beginning to know how much you know about a certain topic, and it can be done at the end in order to understand, or in order to know how much your students have learned from the course that you taught them. It can also be used to determine how good the instructor is at teaching the students. So it is not only helpful for the students in order to know whether they understand or not. No, it is also helpful for the teacher himself or herself, because it will show him or her whether he was a successful teacher or not. The test must have material that is covered in the class by the instructor. There should be what? A textbook. And this textbook should be explained by the teacher. The teacher or the instructor sets the test according to the curriculum, okay, that was presented. Examples of criterion reference tests include the tests that are given in schools and colleges in classes by a teacher. This helps the teacher determine if the student should pass the class. So the exams that we have in schools, the exams that we have in colleges, they are called what? Criterion reference assessment. While, for instance, the IELTS, the TOEFL, the SAT, these are what? These are norm reference assessment. Okay? So these are the types of assessment. Finally, we come to the what? To the approaches to classroom assessment, which are three. They are assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning. Assessment for learning, we assess to learn. Okay? Who is assessing here? The teacher. You see, who is the assessor? The teacher. He is assessor whom? The students. Why? To get information, to gather information. Information about what? About his instructional process or procedure. Is it clear? So here the teacher is assessing his students in order to get information that would help him in the future or her in the future to improve his teaching procedure, his course, to build new courses, to maybe to add items or to delete items, to add more activities. Is it clear? This is what? This is assessment for learning. Similar to what? Similar to formative assessment, because it can be done in the daily classes that you have with your students. Number two, assessment of learning. So we assess the learning abilities, what our students have learned, what we taught them or not. Who is assessing them? The teacher. Okay? Why? Because I am after what? Assessing the knowledge of my students. Okay? It happened when? Usually at the end of the course, at the end of the school year. So it is similar to what? It is similar to summative assessment. Okay? Number three, assessment as learning. Who's doing this? The student himself or herself. Is it clear? Why? So it is called what? It is called self-monitoring and self-correction or adjustment. You as a student, you assess yourself every day after any test that you take in class, after any quiz, every quiz, after every test, when you get a score, you assess yourself. Okay? In order to judge whether you were a successful student or not, you need to work hard for the next time or not. You find that you are weak in a certain point and you need to develop it, to work hard on it or not. What is it called? It is called assessment as learning. Okay, so I know that it has been a very long video. because you see that the topic or the subject of assessment is a long one. It has many details regarding defining it and its types and the approaches. Okay, but I hope that you have time to watch the video and to understand. Thank you.